All right. Yeah, the problem is at the end of the day, apparently the good stuff is empty. But it's all right. Hello. Welcome to our talk, Exploiting Bluetooth from Your Car to the Bank Account. To get this out of the way, first, the main speaker sadly cannot be here tonight. He didn't receive a visa in time. We still don't have to do without him. But the second part of the video with all the technical details of the talk will be given via video. So if you have questions at the end, afterwards, I'll do my best to answer them online or offline or connect you with Vlad, who's the main wizard behind this talk, really. To prove this, I'll let Vlad introduce himself, and I hope this works. Do we have sound? Do we have any sound? Otherwise I can introduce him, but where do I put that sound here? It's didn't do anything.
And the volume's up all the way?
Yeah, on this it is. On here, I don't know.
Can we check the volume on your computer? That is up all the way?
It's not.
Recording. My name is Vladislav, but some of you might know me as Wiser on Streets. I'm a bounty hunter and primarily focus on web mobile infrastructure when it comes to pen testing. I also focus on code reviews and development of the tools and frameworks. I'm currently open to the new opportunities, so feel free to reach out. I also have additional certifications, awards, and masters. But the most important fact is that I have never attacked Bluetooth or cars before, and I applied some of the bounty hunting techniques to it and got some interesting results for you.
All right. Yeah, sorry for this. Apparently this was the first talk today with audio. So let's move on. After Vlad introduced himself, who am I? My name is Martin. I'm a security researcher and a scientist at the Swiss Cyber Defense Campus, which is the procurement agency of the Swiss military. I have a background in wireless security, been publishing in all the major academic system security conference, and I've been leading research efforts not just on cars, but on all sorts of transportation security at our campus. That includes aviation, so I've just done a talk at the Aerospace Village, so you can always check that out, but also space, cars, and trains. I have never looked at Bluetooth before this work, but we've done work on cars, so you can also check out brokenwire.fail, where we've hacked electric charging processes. So let me first introduce you to the motivation for this research. One of our main jobs at the campus is to support procurement for the Swiss military and for the federal government. So we want to really make sure that the government and the military buy secure systems. As you can imagine, the DoD buys quite a lot of IT systems, but also other systems such as cars. If you buy that in high volume, you have quite decent negotiation leverage with manufacturers. In general, public procurement, if you don't know, it's done with tenders. You can basically broadly divide it into a pre-tender stage, then the actual tender contract, and the time after actually having procured the systems and even received and deployed the systems. Doing simple pen testing after you have bought these things, that's often too late for us. The leverage you have in negotiations, it's partly gone, and the systems, they're already in operation. I mean, at that point, you run insecure systems. So that's not ideal. Something else we do is we do a lot of research on standards. That works. If you look at aviation, for example, you find a lot of flaws, and in principle, you can try to change that in the long run. The problem is most of these areas have very long life cycles. So even if you find and demonstrate major flaws in protocols and technologies being used there, it will take decades until that is being changed in practice. So again, not too helpful for our case here. So what do we want to concretely do here to support our procurement? We want to do concrete vulnerability research as early as possible. We want to really help shape the security requirements during the process and in the final tenders. To do that, we work with the manufacturers, but we also use support from academia in Switzerland and outside to bring everyone together to make the systems more secure and not just do this for us, but for everyone. So concretely, if we do research, we follow a responsible disclosure process with the manufacturers. If we find anything, we publish at conferences, also come to hackathons now, and we also release our code wherever possible, just as in this case. That brings me then to today's concrete case study, vehicles and the army and Bluetooth. As alluded earlier, the DoD buys a lot of vehicles, not just these that you can see here, probably the ones you think of first. Luckily, these don't have Bluetooth, or at least I think, I mean, I haven't checked all of them, you don't really know. They might exist these days as well, but in general, they don't. But honestly, boringly, by far the most vehicles being procured by our DoD are box standard, run-of-the-mill civilian cars. And they all have Bluetooth. You basically cannot buy a car without it, even if you want it. So even we can't get that without. That brings me off the scope of this research now. Bluetooth, of course, is not the only interface you find in the car. Cars are super complex systems. When doing a count, we found at least 19 interfaces in modern cars. from wired OBD ports to the key fob. If there's an issue with any of these interfaces with these systems, the only way traditionally for a manufacturer to do anything and to deal with it in that car and that model is to do a recall. And recalls typically for safety problems, they're expensive and rarely done, really just for very important safety problem. For security reasons, this rarely happens, to be honest. So that leaves us with a very complex attack surface, much of which actually has been discussed at DEF CON, also at the Car Hacking Village. They specialize in that, of course, but just an illustration here, don't have to check all of this, but it's a very big complex attack surface you have in modern cars. So why are we looking now specifically at Bluetooth? Well, most importantly, nobody had done it yet. So there's a lot of Bluetooth research, of course, but nobody has really checked on a large scale all the exploits that exist in Bluetooth with a reasonable amount of cars. So that sort of Bluetooth security in cars hasn't been addressed. That felt to us like an oversight, not just from the procurement perspective, but over 1 billion cars have Bluetooth. And as mentioned, you can't do anything about that if you buy a new car. That overall makes the research very impactful, not just for us, but really for anyone with a car. And we're very happy also with the outcomes that we had from this research, which was led by Vlad, who will now present the technical details. And I will come back afterwards for any questions or any information.
Bluetooth is a short-range wireless communication standard that is not specific protocol but multiple different protocols that work on top of each other and that are maintained by different entities. Due to this complexity, there are different errors and misunderstandings that arise, and these are the primary source of the vulnerabilities that we keep finding. We are only going to talk about the Bluetooth classic here. We are not going to talk about the Bluetooth 1G at all. So what you have to remember about the Bluetooth is that it is a transport plus additional functionality on top of it. And when I refer to the functionality, I refer to the Bluetooth profiles that allow you to make calls, stream audio, share context messages, and even have the whole internet stack on top of the Bluetooth. So Bluetooth is rich in the functionality and we have to secure it, and for that we have pairing. When it comes to pairing, it depends on the capabilities of the device and the security options. So when it comes to the capabilities themselves, they depend on the input and output capabilities of the device. So if the device has both of them, then we call such device display yes, no. If the device has only output capabilities, then we call such device display only. When it comes to the devices that only has input capabilities, we call such devices keyboard only devices. And when the device doesn't have any of the capabilities, so we call such devices no input, no output capability device. We can also summarize the security model of the Bluetooth as everything or nothing, as fast pairing. We can access almost all functionality that is available to us on the target device without any further authorization in most of the cases. That's why we have to be sure and confident in the pairing process, and for that we have different pairing modes. So when one of the devices doesn't support security options, then for example it doesn't have simple secure pairing and secure connections, then legacy pairing is used, and from its name you can infer that it's legacy and ideally shouldn't be used at all. To give you some reasons, it's vulnerable to the non-plain text attacks, and also the security of the link depends on the 4-digit PIN, which we can easily brute force. So then when it comes to devices that doesn't have input capabilities, if one of the devices doesn't have input capabilities, then just works pairing mode is used. And if for this pairing mode, there are no guarantees that you are actually pairing with the device that you want to pair with. And that's why it is intrinsically vulnerable to the man-in-the-middle attacks. When it comes to the passkey entry, it was recently discovered that it's vulnerable to the message confusion man-in-the-middle attack, which is not remediated yet in the latest Bluetooth version. It might be there for a few years at least. So it leaves us with only one parent mode, which is actually secure, and this is numeric comparison. It is executed only for the devices that have display as no capabilities, and they both want to pair with each other. Then when it comes to when we are past pairing, most of the firmwares or all of the firmwares do not differentiate between the pairing modes used, so whether or not you use the secure pairing mode or not. And that means that legacy pairing is the same as numeric comparison, at least in the eyes of the firmware. So Bluetooth have been there for more than 22 years, and we have found that there are more than 108 different attacks on the Bluetooth standards themselves. As of March 2024, also Sounds provided statistics that there are approximately 650 different CVEs related to the Bluetooth devices as of 2022, and even more right now. So for the presentation, we are only going we are going to differentiate between 4 different categories of the exploits. So when I refer to the critical exploits, I refer to the remote code execution, memory leakage, information leakage. But then in the middle and announcers categories are actually self-explanatory, while chaining category describes not specifically vulnerabilities or exploits, but rather weaknesses that one can use to make the attacks possible, or they actually allow or make some of the attacks to be executed easily. We actually tried, even though Bluetooth have been there for 22 years, it's been subject to the extensive security research. There are still charges involved into testing it. So it lacked the common database of Bluetooth vulnerabilities, it lacked the framework for testing it, and in general, the attacks are being shared, but the proof of concepts are not. And if they are shared, they are generally shared on the sites that are not quite well indexed. So it's quite challenging to find such proof of concept. And if you find the proof of concept, there is a high chance that the proof of concept will be based on the old hardware that you cannot buy anymore. And this also applies to the recently publicized exploits, for example, in 2023. When it comes to testing, there are intrinsic false positives and false negatives when you test in the black box fashion for the null source-based attacks. And then it's a bit tricky to automate the denial source attacks in some cases, especially for some of the devices, because the denial source attacks are quite powerful in these cases, and it requires rebooting the device, but it's quite difficult to do. For example, in case of the cars, in some cases it requires to wait for 10, 20 or 30 minutes, so it's a bit tricky. We tried to solve some of these problems, and that's why we come up and open source the framework, vulnerability testing framework for Bluetooth Classic. I collected and redeveloped 44 different exploits. Also, the main goal is reproducibility of the past and future research. There is also a balance between automation, semi-automation, and manual tests. So even though the attacker side is automated, the victim side is not. It's infeasible to do so, so you still have to do some of the manual actions on the, for example, on the infotainment screen. I also evaluated half of the exploits on the non-vulnerable devices, while for the other half I ensured that the exploits write to some the payload, but as there were no non-vulnerable devices for them, we use them as is. But still, these exploits found the real vulnerabilities in the cars, so I'm quite confident in them. The toolkit itself works pretty straightforward. The tester executes the command, then the engine loads the predefined exploit profile, then checks for the repairability and availability of the target device without requiring any interactions from the tester, then executes the exploit, and after that, depending on the exploit type, it either compares the value, or it checks the variability and availability of the target device once again. After that, the toolkit reports back to the tester. So I use this toolkit to attack different cars, and the setup was pretty minimalistic, Ubuntu-based laptop, or you could have used the virtual machine, USB cables, the development board, and Nexus 5 phone for denial of service attacks and internal blue attacks. Then I spent approximately 1 to 3 hours per car as different issues arose, and for some of the cars, especially the internal combustion cars, you have to test them outside, as they require the engine to be started to access the infotainment system, and because of that you have to test them outside. If you can connect to the infotainment system and observe the logs, please do that, as it would help to remediate some of the false positives and false negatives. So all of the cars were provided by the Cyber Defense Campus, Army Logistics, and some were provided by friends and acquaintances. In total, we had 22 cars. Only 4 were partially tested. You might think that the sample size is quite small, but it is the biggest out there. We tried to focus on different categories of the cars, monetary-wise, and also focusing on the top manufacturers, so that we would have a notion of the state-of-the-art security, Bluetooth security in the automotive industry. And finally, all of the Blue Toolkit tests are non-invasive, so we didn't have any problems with the cars afterwards. I spent approximately 40 hours throughout a few weeks and found 73 different vulnerabilities. Some issues were not reportable because they are inherent issues, and that's why I was able to report only 64 vulnerabilities. All of the vulnerabilities that were reported responsibly, and all manufacturers and vendors had time to fix them, but you already guessed that not all of them did that, but we still are releasing as there have been more time. They had a lot of time to do so. So generally, the first thing that I wanted to share is that the cars are generally lagging in adoption of the newest Bluetooth standards. So for example, you wanted to buy a 2023 car, you would expect that the hardware used in it would be rather recent, but in fact, what you get is the Bluetooth version from 2014. And the difference is 9 years in this case. On average, it's 7 years, and mean is also 7 years. So in the time frame of 9 years, there have been a lot of research done into the Bluetooth. So there are more than 10 different attacks on the core specification itself, which also affects your Bluetooth version. And that's why you're in risk because there are existing vulnerabilities that could be exploited in your car. First, you might think that you can remediate them with the firmware update. Here's the first problem. Most of the cars still don't provide the firmware updates. And the second problem is that you cannot remediate the core specification attacks with the firmware updates, as they generally require the fix in the standard level first, then a few years would pass as the new hardware would be developed and be available on the market. After that, you will be able to actually swap the hardware in your car for the newest, but no one is going to do that for you, and manufacturers most likely won't be doing that, and it is required because you can change the Bluetooth version only by swapping the hardware. You cannot do that in the firmware. So we've been testing for the known vulnerabilities, and we actually expected that we won't find known vulnerabilities in the cars produced in 2022 and 2023. That were our expectations, but in fact we still found a lot of cars that had them. And for example, Tesla cars, they had a specific man-in-the-middle vulnerability that also should in theory exist in other models. You can check it for yourself. But the most interesting view is actually on the average number of vulnerabilities found per car and manufacturer, as you can see here the differences between them and also the similarities. So when it comes to the critical vulnerabilities, there were only 3 manufacturers that had them, Renault, Opel, and Volkswagen. So these vulnerabilities were rather old, and they could have been fixed with the firmware update, but there were no firmware updates for these vulnerabilities for these cars. Then when it comes to the denial of service and man-in-the-middle attacks, you have to notice that if one of the manufacturer doesn't have man-in-the-middle attacks, they would generally have denial of service attacks, or vice versa. So these types are omnipresent and they can be swapped. Both of them can be used to establish the man-in-the-middle position. So you can use both denial of service attacks and man-in-the-middle attacks to aid you in establishing the man-in-the-middle position. So this knowledge would be very helpful in the future, so try to remember it. And as we've been testing for the known vulnerabilities, you already guessed that we found some new ones, especially some new attacks, actually. So the first attack is the contact extractor attack. Here the victim establishes the Bluetooth connection with the car, then shares the contacts via phone book exit profile, and leaves the car without unpairing the phone, for example, by switching off the Bluetooth or just walking away. Then we will be able to spoof the MAC address to the MAC address of the victim, establish the Bluetooth connection, and extract the contacts. But it would have been an ideal case, but unfortunately we cannot do that because both the attacker and the car run the phone book exit profile client servers, and only the servers can serve the contacts. So this specific attack applies in the car sharing context, and due to that fact, we would have to get into the car. We do not need to start the car. We just need to access the infotainment system, and it is accessible without starting the engine. So we would have to search for the parcel number on the infotainment screen. And if the car is vulnerable, it would show us the contacts. So here you can see that we connected to the Renault car. We do not have any context on the left, but when we switch to the dial pad and search for the part of the number, then the contacts are shown to us. The second attack is very similar to the known put man-in-the-middle attack, with some caveats that apply to automotive industry. So some of the cars actually deny connections or pairing to be initiated from the known put capability devices, but there are also the cars that allow the connection to be initiated from the user smartphone and also from the car. So in case the connection is being initiated from the car, there are some cars that actually forget that they denied access to the non-put capability devices, and thus it might be possible to get the connections from the car to the attacker, for example, by self-jamming or pre-committing or using other techniques, so that we might be able to get the man-in-the-middle position. So the third attack is actually the attack on the numeric comparison man-in-the-middle. This is an insecure numeric comparison man-in-the-middle attack. In this case, it is invitation specific attack. So in this case, the car is either has the design problem or they have a state problem. In case of the state, we would have to check the connection with different capabilities, while for the design we would have to just observe the pairing process. So in case the car is vulnerable, it wouldn't need any confirmation of the pairing on the infotainment screen, or it show non-put like confirmation without showing the pairing number, or it will show you static number across different pairing attempts. So due to this fact, we would have all of the pieces to establish the man-in-the-middle position or just the connection to the car. So to give you some of the examples in case of the Honda cars, they show you the pairing number, they show you the button to cancel the connection, the pairing or the connection, and but they show you the button to stop the pairing, and this is a problem because the whole logic is on the attacker side. In case of the Audi cars, they show you non-put like confirmation window, they don't show you the pairing number, and if you click accept, the pairing would be done. After that, they will show you the window with the pairing number and the button to cancel pairing, so unpair. But in this case, there are two possibilities. So in the case of the first one, if the user clicks yes or pair on their phone yes, then on their phone first, then we might be able to get the man-in-the-middle position. If they don't, then they might spot the attack and thus would have 5 to 10 seconds to execute it. When it comes to the BMW cars, they had a state problem. Some of them still might have, but it should be fixed in the newer versions, in the newer firmware versions. So in this case, you can force the state problem by using the capabilities other than display yes no, and it will show you the specific number that you see in the screen. After that, you'll be able to establish the man window position or adjust the connection to the user or to the car. In case of the Renault cars, they didn't give the user any control whatsoever, so anyone could connect to it. So you've seen that I found many different vulnerabilities in the car, specifically primarily denial of service attacks and man-in-the-middle attacks, but you still might have a question, what can we do with them? And this is what we are going to explore now. So first thing, we have to establish the man-in-the-middle position, and for that we have three different options. First one is to do selective jamming. In case of the selective jamming, it's relatively difficult to do, but it's still possible. So in this case, we would have to spoof the MAC address of the car and then selectively jam it. After that, we might be able to get the connection request or pairing request from the user, or do it vice versa. The second option is to use denial of service attacks and deny Bluetooth service to the car, and then spoof the MAC address again and get the connection from the user or vice versa. The third option is actually to pre-commit with different MAC addresses, but the same names as those the car and the user would expect. So in this case, if we connect to the car, we would have the name of a user, and if we connect to the user, we would have the name of the car, so that the user would be lured into pairing. You might actually have a question or a problem with discovering the MAC addresses. You might think it is difficult, but in fact it's rather easy, and it became easy as of recently. So for example, you have at least two options. The first option is to simply listen for the MAC addresses, for discoverable MAC addresses with your laptop hardware. You would be able to find only discoverable MAC addresses, so the sample size won't be big, but it might be enough for the attacks. And the second option is to use Bluetooth attack to actually get the MAC address, almost all MAC addresses are in the Bluetooth classic space with the help of EuroSRP and Ubuntu. So it's approximately $2,000 worth of the equipment. So with that, you'll be able to discover the MAC addresses that are in non-discover mode for almost all of the attacks that we are going to show you. So then, with this specific part, you would be able to get your first click or the first seamless click, and after that, you might have a question, what can we do with the man-in-the-middle position? So in this case, we would have to escape the Bluetooth sandbox, because we're in, so to say, Bluetooth sandbox, as we cannot execute the code, we cannot execute arbitrary code on the target device, and because of that, we'd have to switch to the phones rather than, and look for the functionality that we can exploit. So in this case, generally phones have the phone functionality. They allow you to make calls, play music or stream audio without any authorization, while when it comes to sharing contacts and messages, they require the authorization in some cases. Then they also allow you to emulate the SIM card of the victim or user and get access to the SMS messages and phone calls. While this might seem very interesting, the specific SIM access profile, this is actually deprecated and it's only available on the Android devices, and it has a lot of warnings. It's not like users would not dismiss the warnings, but still it's only available on the Android device. And in fact, the most interesting one is the message access profile, which allows you to extract different messages, for example, SMS messages and emails. In case of the emails, it's only available according to the specification. I haven't been able to find any implementation that actually worked with the emails. So you might find that, might not. I'm not sure in case of the emails, but what I know for the fact is that you can extract the SMS messages that were ever delivered to the phone, and also you can send the SMS messages. So additionally, the user experience is very helpful, as on the iOS devices, this specific functionality is called notifications, while on the Android devices, it's called messages. So there is no mentioning of SMS messages at all. So we come to the generic attack that you can execute, and the first thing that you need is the man-in-the-middle position, which required one click from the user, and then you will be able to ask for the messenger exit profile access, which would require another click from the user. Once granted, you would be able to instruct the user's phone to send the SMS message or call a specific number that you control, so that you would be able to link the phone number to yourself and then use it in the open source intelligence flow, automatic flow, so that you will be able to discover the login names or email addresses, or just use the phone number directly on the services of interest, and then trigger the SMS-based OTP for the accounts that are associated with the victim's phone number. And then the OTP would be delivered to the victim's phone, which we can always retrieve as we have the messenger exit profile access, and then relay back to the backend and hijack the accounts. If this sounds all quite complicated and unlikely to you, I actually have some good news. So first, we do not need to have the man-in-the-middle position at all, we just need the connection to the phone. Secondly, we can link the phone numbers by accessing the metadata of the SMS messages that were previously delivered, and I guess almost all of us has some SMS messages that were delivered to the phone numbers that we use. Then we can also look for the content into the contents of the SMS messages and look for the emails and the login names, or alternatively, we could use the phone number in the data that we found in the open source intelligence flow. Then finally, we do not need to ask for the messenger exit profile authorization for some of the phones, especially 2022 and older phones, but also this applies to the latest phones as well. So this is a 1 to 2 click generic account takeover attack. With this attack, we can bypass MFA. We can hijack accounts for the servers that primarily rely on the SMS-based OTPs, for example, meta services. But the most interesting services that we want to hijack, or potential perpetrators would want to hijack, are the ones for which we can trigger the SMS-based OTP by knowing some information. In most of the cases, it's knowing the email address or the login name. So by knowing this information, you would be able to trigger the SMS-based OTP, and get to notice the information, you can use the open source intelligence for. Then you would be able to hijack PayPal, Coinbase, Google account in case the user is not logged into the Google account on the Android phone. Then you would be also able to, for example, hijack the apps to control the vehicles. But for some of these servers, it's rather difficult to do. So in case of the Apple ID, you have to resort to phishing only, as the victim is constantly notified, and it's infeasible to do the recovery in the timely fashion. Then when it comes to the Google account, if the user is logged in on an Android device, then we would have to know the browser type and operating system type so that we can forge it, and as we'll be close to the victim and have similar IP and location, we will be able to bypass all the checks done by Google and hijack the account. To give you some examples, we would first start with the Android phone. In this case, this is a Samsung S23 for which I did the attack. So almost all of the Android phones are actually always pairable and discoverable. So you can execute the attack at any time you want. And once we try to connect and pair, we can force the node-bit confirmation window that wouldn't show any pairing numbers to compare, and thus the user would see only that specific device wants to pair with them, and the buttons to pair or cancel. So in this case, it's the art of choosing the names to lure the victim into pairing, or for that we can do the targeted attacks to observe the victim, or just use the most common ones and try to pair randomly. After that, we can ask for the messenger exit profile access, and in most of the cases it is a typical workflow for the cars and smartwatches and speakers. So if you forge the name for these devices, you would be more likely to get the messages access if the victim is more or less cautious. But I guess most of the users are not, so they would probably grant the access. Once granted, you'll be able to execute the attack. So get the phone number, force the SMS-based OTP on this specific site, then extract the OTP, enter the OTP, change the password, and log out the user from all of the sessions for the Samsung account. And I was able to log out the user from their own phone and completely hijack the Samsung account. So this is a two-click generic attack, and also who was working on the patch of hardening for the Android devices, while Samsung patched this their part in the Samsung account service in June 24. They actually said that they fixed the vulnerability in November 2023, but I reported it in May 2024 and it was exploitable at that time, but who knows. When it comes to the exploiting iOS devices, you can actually exploit map the same way on the iOS devices as on the Android devices, as on each new pairing request or in each new pairing, the user would need to explicitly allow notifications by going to the settings menu for this specific Bluetooth device and then toggling a button to allow the notifications. It's quite infeasible when we do the attack that way. But what if we can renegotiate the connection for an already connected device that already has the notification permissions? You would expect that the notifications would be reset on each pairing, which is a requirement as per specification, but iOS doesn't follow that. So you can spoof the MAC address for an already connected device that already has access or permissions and try to repair. In this case, here I wasn't able to force the node-bit like confirmation window that wouldn't show the pairing number to compare, but you might also experiment with that and maybe get the node-bit like confirmation window. But it is unfortunately that it's not the case as of today. But what's most interesting is that the iOS is also helping us in one other way. They fetch the name of the previously connected device from the cache and use it in the pairing request. So if the user had some kind of esoteric name for their device, they would be more inclined into pairing with us. And once they click pair, we would have the notification permissions as the previous device, as the previous connection had them. So we'll be able to execute the attack. In this case, for example, hijack the Facebook. But you might actually want to focus not just on the Facebook, but also on the Apple ID itself. So recently there was an attack that involved phishing and SIM swap attack, and the perpetrators were able to steal $22,000 from the victim. And here we can try to replicate the similar attack with the map attack. So here we'll be able to inject the SMS message as if they came from Apple and do phishing. Once the user enters the Apple ID and the password, the SMS-based OTP or MFA would be used, and we'll be able to steal the SMS message value or OTP value via the messenger extra profile attack. So here we just swap the SIM swap with the messenger extra profile attack. We can also focus on other applications like PayPal or Coinbase or any other of interest, so you do not have to always focus on the Apple ID. But the most actually interesting, worrying, or best part or worst part of this talk is that this specific vulnerability is not fixed as of the latest iOS version, and it's not going to be fixed. The Apple said that the users are safe because they are showing the parent prompt, but I seem to see that they generally violated the Bluetooth verification, and that's why their users are one click away from their accounts being stolen. But of course, it's up to you to judge and decide whether this is a specific vulnerability that should be fixed or not. But I personally hope that Apple would eventually fix it and correct it accordingly. For the attack itself, I'm releasing a tool that affects more than 50% of the smartphone market worldwide, more likely to affect the whole market. And this specific tool would allow you to retrieve and send SMS messages, as well as look for the emails and phone numbers on the device. And it would be possible to connect the tool to the infrastructure that would actually do the recovery process. So here we come to the key takeaways. And the first thing that I want to mention is that even the newest cars are generally shipped with the protocol Bluetooth vulnerabilities, and it's not really easy to fix this because the design of the car is locked in just several years before it's manufactured, and it's not possible to change the Bluetooth version in it or hardware in it. So it's quite difficult to do so, and we have to live with the anticipation of some kind of protocol or Bluetooth vulnerabilities in the cars and knowing that. Then when it comes to pairing security or in the secure environment is extremely important, as it's the only safeguard against the man-in-the-middle attacks. But what you have to remember is that forcing repairing is possible and it might be malicious. So we have to watch out for that as well. Then, when it comes to the SMS-based OTP services or the services that rely only on SMS-based OTPs, it might be rather risky for the end users, and that's why maybe it would be best to consider other OTPs sources. So, for example, email-based OTPs, and in that case, it might add additional safeguards to the users. So thanks for listening. Now I hand over to Martin and maybe see you next year.
All right, thanks for staying with us. There's just 2 points left from me at the very end. Let me find the right slides. No, that's not it. Oh, be quicker that way. So sorry. We've seen that much of Bluetooth is fundamentally insecure, both the standards and the implementations. The toolkit, have the link on the last slide as well, is online for you to check your cars, your Bluetooth products, any of them. And of course, we're not liable for anything you do with it. But we focused on Bluetooth and cars, and just very last thing, of course you can check anything, and we took it to one of the domains we're very familiar with, which is aviation. We tried it out on our own lab of certified real aircraft hardware, which also has Bluetooth to connect so-called electronic flight bags, which is just an iPad really, with flight computers. And the thing is, these Bluetooth versions are so old, most of these exploits don't work there, because honestly, you can establish the man-in-the-middle position anyway, because the encryption is just so weak or trivial. So we haven't explored this further, but it should be very easy to also do this on at least these specific flight management systems. With that, thank you for listening and also putting up with the video talk. I hope Lut can make it in person next time. This is the QR code to the GitHub repository where you can find all the information, also this disclosure results. Any questions, I'm available, and Vlad is also very happy if you contact him online. Thank you very much.